I think social media is warfare in the sense of like we battle it. And there are certain battles that I just don't think we can win until we recognize we're in a battle.
If I walked into a house as a parent and there was unfettered internet access on one table and then there was a gun on a second table, I would say I would be more terrified of my child having access to the unfettered internet than I would the gun.
All right, y'all. Welcome back to another episode of The Ever to Conquer. My name is Jamie Grant, your host. I am super excited today to have a guest with us that is becoming a friend. We're going to continue the education theme for a couple, for at least one more episode here. And when I say that, like, I'm going to get educated today. Y'all are going to get educated today. We're also going to talk about some really cool stuff happening in education with Dr. Lisa Strohman. So, Doc, Lisa, however you'd like to be referred as we talk through it. I know you do work all over the country, on TV, in person, with patients. To take time out of your schedule to come do this, we really appreciate it and just want to welcome you.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
So we try to kind of kick off, and sometimes I gloss over it and don't do a very good job. I think your story is incredible. I still laugh about the time we met and we got introduced by a mutual friend who was like, yeah, you two have similar backgrounds. And then you told your background and I was like, we do not have similar backgrounds. But for the audience that doesn't know you or hasn't seen your work, can you give just a little bit of background about who Lisa is?
Sure. You know, I always say when people ask me, I'm just like a small town farm girl trying to make it in the world. It's really kind of my quick answer. But I grew up in Northern California with divorced parents. I spent half my life homeless, bouncing in and out of houses with my mom. Learned a lot about life in those moments. And then I had a dad in law enforcement that was really stable and really was kind of this person who in the 70s was a sole custody of me. So it was a really interesting life with a lot of strife. And I would say around second grade, I kind of was like, what is life? Why am I here? And I was like 8. And so I had this existential crisis as a child. And I had a second grade teacher and she really kind of watched me, like had me come in at lunch, made sure I had food. A lot of times I was like not clean. I didn't have food. And she just kind of like took me aside and like made sure I got the testing and told me I could basically be whatever I wanted in this world. And Mrs. Allison made me a deal in second grade, and I would say probably not old enough to consent when I look back. But she was like, I will give you jelly beans for life if you take these tests. And I was like, cool. Like, and it was like an all day Saturday. And what it was, it assessed me and it basically put me into this gifted program. And I got this plastic necklace of jelly beans that I felt really tricked on. So, but I wear it every time I do an educational conference or I travel. I have Mrs. Allison's jelly beans with me. And it just gave me this like love for, looking for those kids that need extra help. And I've been in the field ever since and advocating and developing and trying to help where I can.
So I didn't even know that part of your background.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's incredible. Like, I'm so glad. That's why we love to do this thing kind of unfiltered, right? Man, there's so many places and that gives such great context where I know some of the work you're doing, like that makes so much sense. We'll come back to it because I want folks to kind of understand professionally where you went from there. And when you say in the field, we're going to have some folks that have seen your book, podcast, like that stuff. But for somebody who has no idea kind of what you've done professionally, let's go to that chapter. And then I want to make sure we circle back in this conversation because I don't think I know I was 40 years old when I learned like the term childhood trauma and even began to have the conversations about attunement, attachment, experiential stuff that, I mean, as a healthy kid that grew up with a lifestyle that was very different than yours, that everybody from the outside would look in and said it's super easy. I had to do some really deep discovery on the little boy and figure out, wait, why do these patterns exist? So I'm fascinated by the topic. It's what drew me to your work in some regards, but without knowing the context. So I don't want to take us there yet.
Yeah. Okay.
But I would love for you to give just kind of the professional background of Lisa or Dr. Strohman to say, hey, this is where I came from, but then this is what I started doing.
Sure. So I would say probably in high school was kind of the beginning of where I was like starting this work of like, I really want to do something that helps other kids. I wasn't really sure. I didn't have any money for college. So I was working my way through college, and I met a professor. I went to UC Davis, and I went into psychology. And this professor was like, hey, you're working with this family that has autistic children. They had 4. I had gotten them into Stanford studies and doing some research on the fact that, you have this Polish mom who's like very high trained in the nursing program, and then this dad who is Russian. And so there's a lot of like at the time information. We're trying to look at like, where is autism starting from? And, they just had this massive family. And so I ran a team, did like some policy work with them, brought them resources. And so this professor was like, you should do a JD PhD. And so I was like,
you know what
okay.
Nobody told me in law school? They were like, you should just try and graduate law school, kid. Like, we don't need PhD part of it. Like, just get to the bar.
Just get through. Yeah. Well, and as you know, you don't really know what you don't know. So I was like, cool, like I'll do that. So I applied, and there was 3 programs at the time, and I applied to the one in Philadelphia. So Drexel and Villanova were the joint program. I applied, and the head guy, Dr. Bursoff, was like the head of ethics and all the things. I took the test, the LSAT, the I had to take the LSAT, the GRE, and the GRE Psych. Oof. Nailed the GRE Psych, GRE. Like I had like perfect scores on like a lot of that. The LSAT, I got like a 1. At the time, I think it was like a 182 or something like that. It was like a great score.
Which is close to perfect. Yeah.
Yeah. So he's like, well, if you would have gotten like a 184, I could have guaranteed you. There's only 5 spots, right? So I was like, okay, I'm going to go take it again because this is how stubborn I am. I got the little alley cat in me. So I was like, so I went and took it, and I called him back. I was like, Dr. Bursoff, I said, I received my score. It should be in your inbox. I got a 184. And he said, well, welcome to the program. So I didn't know what I was fighting to get into. I just like was so pissed that somebody told me no at that point. So that's where I started this career of law and psychology. It was an incredible experience. I worked in Congress for a stint in a summer. I worked for a California congressman. I was a legislative assistant there. I found out in 1998 that women weren't allowed in certain spots on the Capitol Rotunda. I went to go deliver the votes that my legislative director and 3 other male colleagues sent me to go deliver. And I remember having grown up with my dad and my brother, like, these guys are back there laughing and thinking she's never going to get it through. And I thought, I don't think Larry, Capitol Police Officer Larry, is going to shoot me. So I just pushed through. And I remember thinking, like, this is probably not the place for me if there's like locked doors and like secret societies in the 90s. So I did not stay in politics. I went back in the next year and worked for the FBI as an honors intern. So you have to apply. They take in undergrad and graduate students. I was placed into the profiling unit at the time in Quantico. Louis Freeh was the director at the time, and I did homicidal pedophilia, which was mind-chilling and awful because 387 cases. My task was, where did these guys end up, and where were they? Had they been released? Were they still in prison? And I had to do this massive report, which meant I had to look at all the pictures, and it just really tore my heart and soul. I started having night terrors again, and it was just like a really difficult time. And at the end of it, Director Freeh pulled me in, and he's like, you do really nice work. We'd love to sponsor your dissertation on infant abduction. So how do you profile somebody who steals a baby 0 to 1 years of age they had never done? So that's my dissertation, and my research for my degree was in that with NCMEC, National Center of Missing Exploited Children. And so I spent about 7 years with the Bureau in total. And that gave me the foundation that I think that you were asking about to be here, because I was sitting in the offices in Quantico when Columbine happened. And I remember sitting there and watching all of the agencies came together in that moment, and they all came. And I remember thinking, the greatest minds of our country missed this. And our children, this is before I was in my 20s. I didn't have kids. And I remember thinking, like, they're going to use the internet different. And we didn't have social media at the time, but we had these boxes of printouts that Eric Harris had posted already online through the internet. And I just remember thinking, like, this is going to be bad and we've got to buckle in. And so I've been in the space of psychology and technology since that moment. Is that the background?
It's so good, and there's so much like when I laughed. Just to be clear, when I laughed in the middle of that, before anybody gets confused on timeline, I laughed when you said I had to take the LSAT and the GRE. My dad was trying to convince me, as a lawyer who had had some success. My brother is a savant of a trial lawyer, the best talent I've ever seen in a courtroom. He's 14 years older than me. And I thought, like, when I showed up at Auburn, this is actually a true story. I showed up at Auburn for orientation, and I saw the most beautiful girl I'd ever seen, and she was going to get a political science major. And so I thought, well, my whole family is lawyers. I'm going to get a political science major with her. And my dad's like, don't get a poli-sci major. Like, it doesn't do anything for you other than get you into law school, and you don't even know if you want to do that. Like, go get a business degree. And so we kind of like battled through it. I got a business degree once I finally convinced myself to try hard enough to get through calculus. But then when I'm getting ready to leave Auburn, it's like, wait, am I going to the real world or am I doing more school? And this will help you profile me. I was like, wait, the GRE seems like a lot of studying. The LSAT just seems like logic that I can take and keep going. And so I took the LSAT, ended up in law school, and then said, I hate practicing law, and here I am. So there's something about my resistance to effort sometimes that kept me from the GRE. But when you said, yeah, I took both, I was like, who does that? I want to make sure folks understand this. When you talked about, because I'm super fascinated. You know better than I do and can tell me whether I'm right or wrong. I think there's certain things the human brain is just not designed to see and experience. Like, I think the human brain is this treasure that we're born with, that, like, the folks that have to do the Google image search screening, right? When I don't know if you've seen any of that.
Yes,
but, like,
absolutely.
Right? I mean, they're having to tag. It sounds maybe like people glaze over it, but it's like, is this suitable for Google? Well, that has all sorts of categories of violence, sex, and different things. When you were doing, you said the homicidal pedophilia, and you described it like you were looking at where they went after. So if I'm making sure I understand this, we've got somebody that's been convicted, done time, and now you're doing the profile work of what happened to them subsequent to the event. Is that right?
Yes. Yep.
How important was that to then be able to do the profiling work you described, where you said, hey, because what I hear you saying, and I want to make sure we understand it, is like, I've done the root cause analysis, let's say, on each of these cases. Now I want to apply that to how we profile the people that are taking children 0 to 1 so that we could hopefully prevent that. Am I tracking that right? And how would you describe, like, correct me or maybe explain how those two experiences played together?
Yeah. Well, and a third experience in the same time was having the ability to be on scene in this unit, which is, it's basically by the FBI academy, and like and there's like a building, and that's where all the profilers are. I actually got to sit through active cases that came through as well. So
Right.
like as they were doing it. So I was never classified as a profiler. I was a visiting scholar after I was an honors intern. So just to clarify that, but I was in that space and I was friends with all of them. So the research I was doing for sure was, what was the sentencing guidelines? Where did they end up? What was the crime that they created? And so we had this whole rubric of data that we're looking at post hoc of the event, right? And so your question is, when I look at what's happening from that moment, and I do 0 to 1 years of age, I will tell you how that happened. Louis Freeh was a very Catholic religious man. He was very family oriented, and I wish I would have had.
Who is Louis Freeh for our folks?
Oh, Louis Freeh, the director of the FBI,
Okay.
would have been in the late 90s into the 2000s when I was there. And I wish I would have had a cell phone back in those days, because his office was, here's a wall with all of his like diplomas and like the flag, and this is where you take a picture of him. And then here's a wall with a bookcase and all of the things. And he had a private wall that was all of his children's artwork. Like, and it was just paper, just like we do as parents. And it was just the most heartwarming thing. He said to me, I remember in a meeting, he said, Lisa, he said, we don't have hundreds or thousands of these cases every day, but women, and this is what happened, women were starting to get abducted out of parking lots pregnant. And he said, we shut down the hospital. So some of us will remember that there was this huge issue and JACO happened. And if you had kids after a certain time, you had a wristband and your child had a wristband, and either the child stayed in the room with you or those wristbands had to match at all times if that child was traveling anywhere. That was to combat people who were going into hospitals and just like lifting babies, pretending to be photographers, all of the things. And so when we did that, the consequence to that action to protect these children within those units was women on the outside who were just going to set up their nurseries and shopping at malls and nursery and Targets were getting abducted out of the parking lot, pulled over, drugged, murdered, and babies cut out of them. And he was like, one is too many on my watch, and I want to figure out who's doing this and what that offender looks like. So that's, I think a lot of times in law enforcement, it takes a leader, it takes somebody who's like, let's figure out the why. And again, like 0 to 1 years of age, people don't think about that age, but I will tell you, it's a very, very just tragic, I would say, situation, because you lose a mother, you lose a family, the child disappears. And what he said to me at the time was, I know your heart is hurting from this work I put you on. I want you to have something that is like rewarding. And 87% of those babies are found. And he's right. It's a better outcome, but also difficult.
Would you agree? Because I think the other thing I hear you kind of saying, and I want to make sure this, implying, and maybe this is just me projecting, but when I think about the 3 years I did in government, they were hell. Like it was the worst environment I've ever worked in. I openly talk about that. When I left the state CIO job, I was in the worst shape of my life. And some people go, yeah, you were pretty heavy. And I'm like, yeah, that was the obvious part. But like the spiritual, emotional, relational, like all the other stuff, I was in the worst place I've ever been in. And at the same time, the experience on the inside, like because I gave everything to it, two things are true. Like I completely lost myself in that job because I was giving everything to it. Also, now that I've kind of stepped back and stepped away for a while and taken care of those things, I can look back and go, man, I had experience that is absolutely invaluable that now allows us to apply it in a way that's very productive. So I wouldn't want to go through it again, and I wouldn't really want anyone to go through it again. But if you were going to kind of give the pitch to people, because I do think this is a trend that I hope that we start seeing more of. If you were to give a pitch to a talented professional that you think has something to offer the FBI or any other public institution on kind of a tour of service, like they've been successful in their private sector job, and you go, man, go do 2-3 years. How do you think the time you spent as even an intern or a scholar, and then do you think that you could be doing the work you're doing now without that experience? Or how would you pitch somebody on do a tour of service, be on the lookout for this, and this is how to get the most out of it?
That's a fantastic question. And I would say do it. I would not be here without that time. And to your point, I was married at the time. I'm in grad school. I'm driving from, Quantico back to Philly on the weekends to see my husband, who was in med school at the time. I remember I would cry every time I left on Sunday to drive back to Quantico. It was the hardest time, to your point, of my life. And I do remember at the time, Philly had like the unhealthiest like population in the world. And I was like, oh my God, coming from California, Like they put like canned mushrooms on their sandwiches. I was like, what is this? Like,
It's like the opposite of the South where we fry everything, y'all process everything up there.
Right,
Like,
right. And coming from like
I
Northern
guess we do
California,
both,
where
but
yeah, we had like fresh fruit and like all of the things. So anyway, but I would say to your question on should you serve and do that, I wouldn't be here without that. I have some of the tightest friendships, the biggest, I think, broadband respect of, hey, I went here. This is the work that I did. And what I learned for myself was nobody really has all the answers, but we can figure them out together. And I remember thinking in that space of like, okay, this is just going to take grit and resilience and, you know, all of the things as a child I had learned. And I remember thinking like, I can get through anything if I do it day by day. And the lessons I'm learning through the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, like understanding how, you know, at the time, like John Bonet case and all of the things, like, it's like, there were some really big things that happened in this space where that I had like an inside window to. And what it did for me was that critical thinking piece, which I think a lot of kids don't have nowadays, because we don't have the Dewey Decimal System in the library, and we don't have the need to go and look up books and find them in the library. It's like everything is on this like device that we have. So those steps, and I don't mean to think that they can't think critically, but when you're in a space where you're operating like that, you have to really go upstream and be like, how did this person end up here? And that's what that time at the profiling unit gave to me. It was like, I don't know how these individuals have such evil in their world that they turn out this way. I want to find out why. And so working with John Douglas and like having him come in and talk about the serial killers he had interviewed and all of it was just this Camelot moment in my life that I can't replicate.
Yeah. So, man, there's so much good stuff, and there's so I feel like talking to you is like constantly exercising my discipline on the ADHD, because there's like 6 places I could go, and I love so much of that. I forget where it came from, but a friend at one point said to me, this maybe 10 years ago, something like that. And there was either a study or somebody had just said, like, you know, when you're sitting in a group of friends and somebody goes, hey, who won the national championship that year? What was the actor in that movie? Like, you're in conversation, you're trying to remember it. And they were basically the takeaway was quit going to Google and actually exercise the process of the recall. And that's one thing that I kind of was thinking as you were talking, that I feel I'm now finding myself doing that with GPT or Grok. It's like, hey, time out. Before I go there for recall, let's exercise that thing. Mm-hmm. 2, I think, and I'd love your take on this because you can give like the clinical answer to my kind of redneck takeaway, is that the brain is also a muscle in either literal or metaphor. I don't know if literally right, but like if we quit exercising it, like that has an atrophy effect that I experience I just experience it, that I realize I notice it. And then maybe the other that I think you're just, gosh, this is so good. I obsess over first order principles. And like as a team, whether I'm on a team or leading a team, it's like, what's behind that? What's bigger than that? What's the why behind? Like, let's keep pulling all the threads to make sure we get back to the end. And I think that profiling work you're describing and a lot of the work you're doing, and I want to take us here in a second into that work, because I think it's just incredible. I don't even know that I have a question there. But the other thing I wanted to tell you, maybe this is the question. This is where I was going. I was in the middle of a crazy legislative session. I think it was my last legislative session, and I was carrying 5 or 6 bills that were all nuclear, like just crazy. And that led to me hiring a crisis communications director, because somebody on my team was like, hey, buddy, you can't like deal with all this on your own. Like you need to have somebody that's like a set of eyes and actually coaching you through it. And she texted me the morning of Parkland, and she said, hey, you need to go find your buddies from South Florida, because there's a school shooting happening. And it just so happened that Jared Moskowitz was a Democrat. We'd done a lot of work across the aisle together. I didn't know that Jared went to Parkland at the time, but I went kind of to the back of the chamber where he sat and said, hey man, like, I don't know if you've seen this, but like this is what's going on. And that was really the only, I'll say, school shooting that I felt like I kind of lived through. And I don't even like saying lived through, because that I want to be really careful with my words here. The people who lived through it were at Parkland.
Right.
But what you're touching on that I think brings these two things together, this is way too many words to try and process this. We simultaneously live in this society that doesn't love and embrace critical thinking anymore. It simultaneously lives in headlines and fast and clickbait. And then it collides around a tragedy like a Columbine or a Parkland, where I think the people who really want to dig in and understand, like, how did we get here? How do we stop it? I felt like I was facing a tidal wave in the press that just said, just take all the guns, just hire all the schools. And like, nobody wanted to really do the long work after the headlines were gone to really dig in. And fortunately, we had some policymakers that really wanted to drive that way, a speaker at the time who was really going to drive that way. How do we, in like the cable news environment, or now like the X or Instagram environment, where, the Coldplay content this week with an affair, you can't get away from it. And that one had long legs. Long legs meant like a week. Mm-hmm. How do we unpack that? I don't even know what the question I'm trying to ask, Lisa, but I hear you touching on all of that, where it's like the clickbait, we don't critically think, truth is now optional and no longer a necessity in these conversations, and yet we're talking about like these gross tragedies, which should be the one thing that demands us to like put down all politics, all ambition, all attention and validation and glory seeking, and go like, man, there's a tragedy here. How did we get here? And how do we try and make sure this is the last one with like intellectual honesty? Does that make any sense, or did I just like throw up at you from?
Well, my superpower with my ADD is to grab all the pieces and pull it together. So let's see if I can do it. It's quite the challenge. We're going to do it together though. So critical thinking. When we don't use that brain, as you spoke of, we actually lose mass in our brain. So what we know now is that the white matter in our brain, which is the parts that is processing, the part that we can critically think, all of that part that creates our essence of ourself, starts to atrophy. So we see the actual density of that tissue deteriorate if you're on like, and where I'm looking at in my space is if we're on kind of play or toy or inconsequential tech or social media for more than 2 hours a day. More than 2 hours a day. The average.
Whoa.
Right.
Say that again.
More than 2 hours.
Loudly and quietly.
More than 2 hours a day on something that I call junk tech versus tech as a tool. Junk tech creates a loss and an atrophy of your brain mass. We see the science. We can see it happening. Jean Twenge out of UC San Diego does a ton of this work. Dr. Daniel Amen does a ton of this work. We can see the brain deteriorating. And the other part of it on the graphic will show you the white matter. And the white matter of our brain is the superhighway. So if you're trying to get from Florida to California, you got to take a ton of highways to get there. If you're a kid or an adult and you're trying to think through, why did this happen and how do we get here? Who won the national championship? You got to travel that highway to the other side to figure out that answer. And we also see that we start to get potholes in that. So imagine how much harder it would be if there's detours all the way along, because that white matter is also disintegrating. So from a structural, you're not so far off that we aren't critically thinking. We are losing brain mass. And nobody's really talking about it. I think one of the things that I find when I go and talk to families and I talk in front of schools globally, the kids, when they hear this information, I didn't used to talk to kids about it. But when I start to tell them and show them the pictures, they're like, what? It's like me feeding them drugs or me telling them to go ride a bicycle without a helmet or, get in a car without buckling a seatbelt. They look at me like, why is no adult telling me this? So I think that we're being throttled on that information from the big tech. They have a lot of money. They hide a lot of the data. But we know that that's there. So you're not far off when we talk about critically thinking and what that means in that space. And then when you think about, the Parkland shootings and Uvalde and Columbine, and why that's happening and trying to get upstream from that, what you're talking about, and when you say that you felt it, this is when I went through it and then you corrected yourself. I don't want you to have to correct yourself, but I think it's important to learn there's primary, secondary, and tertiary traumas. Primary traumas are the people that were on that campus. They were in that event. A secondary trauma is somebody who's watching that event, right? And so imagine that secondary trauma is like we weren't actually in danger ourselves, but we are so close to it and we see it happening, which is what our devices do, right? They put us there. Tertiary trauma is what are the effects of that, right? What are the effects that we have of that? And even if we didn't witness it or watch it happen on live TV or on stream, we actually have a tertiary trauma of it because our whole landscape as a family, as a society is changing. So I think that it's important in that space because we all feel it and we are experiencing these traumas that are happening to us. And so it's, to me, like when I actually gave a speech in front of the folks, and several of the families from Parkland were there, and it was the only time I've ever been on stage I was nervous because I felt palpably that emotional connection to them because of my experience with them, although it was away of what they went through.
So you just reminded me of something that I'd forgotten about, but you've been a legislative assistant. You know how whipping votes can happen, right? Like,
yes.
I think when people from the outside don't know the legislative world, whipping can be relatively intense, right? It can be kind of like the application of leverage by leadership in a chamber to try and compel action by a member. And when the bill came out as Republican supermajority, I was a Republican legislator and had a chairmanship at the time, and I was heartbroken by Parkland and also did not feel like I could vote for the piece of legislation that came out because it would, in my pretty plain reading, was a constitutional violation. Like it would, there was some great stuff in there and some things I liked, but I was a no and had told leadership, who happened to be some really good friends, and it alienated at least one significant relationship in my life where that individual felt like you're not my friend if you won't vote for this. And it's like, it was tough. But the whipping process there, the office, the speaker's office was bringing House members that were a no vote in to meet the families. And they didn't bring me in. And I remember sitting on the floor, and because I was in a chairmanship role, like I had a seat kind of in the middle in the second or third row, wherever it was that year. And the Ryan Petty and Andy Pollock, two of the dads, were like in eyesight to me. And you're just counting down the days till this vote's coming, and you know you're going to vote no on this while these folks are up there, and the only reason they're here spending their time in Tallahassee is to say yes. And I remember I went to our comms director at the time in the speaker's office and said, hey, I want to meet with them and just explain to them why I'm going to vote no. And he was like, you really don't have to do that. And I said, I just feel this compulsion that like my name's going to show a red dot, and I want to make really clear to them that I want to work with them. I just can't say yes to this thing. And it's an experience. That meeting didn't go well. It did not go well. And also true, both are good friends now. And it was really interesting that like a third party was kind of meddling for a documentary angle that wasn't really related, but in the meeting and kind of stoking some things. Both are good friends. We've done a lot of good work now. But you touched on two things. Like you just kind of brought that memory back. How would you say when that primary, tertiary, secondary trauma, because we're setting the stage for the work you're doing that I'm really excited to talk about. I remember when I got told not too long ago, several years back, that like the ages 0 to 5 is like the brain formation stuff, let's say, that is like really foundational. How accurate is that? Because I feel like not too long ago we were talking about 0 to 5 is like, these are the formative years, and if you make it through that, you'll be okay. And now we're getting to a place where it's like, man, there's stuff happening after 5 that is like, I feel like we used to say 0 to 5, and the only trauma that mattered was capital T trauma.
Yeah.
And it feels like we're in this moment where we're dispelling that, what feels like a myth. Am I crazy?
No, not at all. I think there's a lot of there's a lot of, I think, dissension in the psychology world of like whether or not we go back and we take these developmental milestones that are like Kohlberg and Piaget and all of these things, and we're like, our world's different now. We should just kind of throw those out and like rewrite those, which I don't think is like necessarily the right response to it. But I do think that children are being influenced different than they were previously. And I think that 0 to 5 years of age, where a child is actually working on their attachment with another adult, is where, I look at some of the things where you have in a crib now, they have these devices where if a child cries, it triggers a mechanism on this computer that actually throws up onto their ceiling like a collage of like flowers or bees or whatever it is. And so it instantly takes the baby out of crying, and it looks up and it's like, oh, because it gets distracted and the light comes on and all of the things, they stop crying, it slows down, it goes off. And so that's awesome if you're a parent who just needs to sleep. But what you're doing for that child is you're saying you're going to cry and ask for an interaction, an interpersonal response from the people that should be most important in your life. And they've just kind of outsourced it to this computer. And so as a child, if you're starting, you look at the little mechanisms of all the little things, giving the child an iPad whenever they're in a restaurant so that they don't have to talk or or they don't have to like be a bother to you. You're outsourcing those experiences for that child in those very formative years of like being self-soothed and how to understand how to connect. So I think it is really a formidable year there, but I think that they're all formidable. The brain isn't done developing until 29. So I always tell people, it's like, yes, those early years are very important. The elementary school years are super important, particularly when you look at the technology influence that's happening there. And then middle school, where we're in this other stage where we're trying to learn who we are, that's super important. And then you get into high school and into college, where it's like we're supposed to learn how to be vulnerable, trust others, and put ourselves out on a limb so that we can fall in love for the first time. That's not going to happen if you look at all the other steps before that. So the 0 to 5 years of age, I think, is important in the sense that it's not the child as much as it is the parent that needs to understand your job is to create that security and that attachment so that child never questions. Because if a child grows up in that attachment phase where they have an insecure attachment or an ambivalent attachment, that will impact how their marriage ends up in their 40s.
Quick anecdote. My sister is the wisest woman I know. My best friend, we were talking the other night, and this topic came up, where so much, and there's like that school of parenting that either we grew up with or we have friends that have seen it. Never married, don't have kids. So like, to me, I kind of try and look at this stuff like, okay, if I have a family, like how would I attack it? And I grew up very much in a household and around people that was like, when the baby was crying, just let it cry, because you don't want to reinforce the attention. And Jeanette and I were talking about this the other night. It's like, where is the right approach of like healthy attachment and security? And so I don't want to take us down that trail because we'll never get to your work, but that is a fascinating question I want to talk to you about later. Because like, I think there's a whole generation that grew up with that school of thought that like, even if it's not the selfish mommy and daddy want to sleep, it's just like, well, don't reinforce that they can just cry and get attention. They need to learn to be tough. And I think we're starting. Different. Yeah. So yeah. So I don't want to take us that. Gosh, I get. You make me so much smarter every time we talk. All right. So let's start turning the conversation towards how you're applying this with kids and what you're doing, and maybe starting at the psychology technology intersection. I know we've touched on it a little bit, but in one of our first conversations, I don't know if you remember this, but I remember saying to you, I was talking about my nephew, who is it's our youngest one. Everybody knows Grant. Grant is super talented, but like, we watch Grant sometimes, it's like there's two kids. There's Grant on his phone and Grant off his phone. Senior in high school, getting ready to go to Clemson, gonna do great. But I remember saying to you, like, I had just moved to Greenville. It was the first time in my life that I knew nobody other than a couple of people. And like this isolation was just bringing out behaviors in me that I was like grossed out by and trying to understand it. And you said grayscale your phone. So that shortcut still exists. But I remember like I was talking about Grant, and then you started talking about the work you're doing. And I was like, hey, just to be clear, like I'm 42 and this is me too. Mm-hmm. And I just remember in a couple of minutes with practical kind of tactics, you were like, hey, this, and this that I still notice make a significant difference in my day or my week or our team when I'm doing. But why don't you start kind of explaining a little bit the work you're doing, because you can't have these one-on-one conversations everywhere. Lisa does not scale if Lisa has to be involved in every conversation. And so let's start talking a little bit about that piece, and then I want to get to the AI piece after, because I think you're like so far ahead of your time, but also like it's coming right now, and you're like right on time, which I think is what's cool. So let's talk first about some of the work you've done with Digital Citizens Academy, and what problem you're trying to attack there.
Sure, thanks. That really, it was like, as a psychologist, I actually have been practicing 22 years. So I've actually been in the space where I'm like, hey, laptops completely screwed up like marriages across the country, AOL.
Why?
Like, face it.
Why? How?
Because it's just because we're not connecting. We're distracted. We're parallel playing. Like we're not actually spending time with one another. And instead of like having trust in interactions with the other person, we're actually like diving into our computers to find things, which makes the other person irrelevant. So I saw that happen. Then I saw Facebook, come in, and it's like, oh, now we can like actually be friends with all the people that we knew in high school. And what about that boyfriend I had in 7th grade? And like, wow, he's like turned out pretty well. And like my husband's like over here, like, running a landscaping business or whatever it is, And so I saw a bunch of marriages falling apart, and I was like, what is happening in our world that, that technology is, to your point. Go ahead.
Can I stop you for a second? Because
sure.
All right. So, so one of the things I love that we've kind of refined is that Facebook normalized relationships with another human happening behind a screen.
Yes.
So it was still a relationship, human to human, but it was behind a screen. AI is going to normalize a relationship with a computer and behind a screen. Right?
Absolutely.
So I think that is a fundamental truth, and why I'm like healthily obsessed with the work you're doing. Yeah. But the other thing I would say that I think you just hit on is that Facebook allowed the comparison prior to the relationship starting. I would suggest that the dating app world is allowing the comparison before the relationship ever starts.
100%.
And we're like scaling these things. It's like unhealthy over here, and it's like metastatic cancer over here, because we went from normalizing relationships peer to peer behind a screen, where AI is doing it peer to computer behind a screen. And now we're actually having relationships as the intermediary for comparison prior to the relationship ever starting, and thinking we could ever have a healthy relationship if the relationship is starting with, well, let me keep swiping and see if there's something better than the digital pen pal I have today.
Right. And are we putting our authentic self forward, or are we putting together a curated, trove of pictures that we've like edited and put out there in ways that make it seem like we're better than we are in many ways? So how does that mess up with your psyche? For sure. So I honestly saw it in adults first, because of my work and where I was. And then to your point, like I was like, okay, so then I started like seeing teenagers in my practice, and that brought me to kind of that bleeding edge of where social media was going to take us, because I had kids telling me things and the apps that they were on. And so I literally was able to understand what the trends were because of my work in the space. And so when you saw these, there was an app that came out, Yellow, which was literally Tinder for kids. And I was like, whoa, we should probably like oversee what this is. And like, they downplay everything, and they allow, kids age 4+, you can download, apps that like you can change your whole appearance. There's an app that's out right now that like you can notify people, anybody that you meet. You have to be 9 to download that. That sounds awesome. So, I saw like what those devices were bringing to them, not necessarily the technology itself. And I was like, I don't want to be that person that's throwing technology out, because what a grace and a gift it can be. Like to take a child that is in an inner city to the trails of Machu Picchu, because that child will never probably be there, right? They're not going to have that experience. But man, we can put them in a headset. We can show them the world. So that's amazing. So I just have been in.
Why? I want to dig on this because I'm obsessed with that topic. I'll give the statement for you to correct her. I think we have an entire, and this struck me when I chaired criminal justice as a committee, and it's like, all right, how do we really make a societal impact? And what hit me, I only practiced law for like a year and a half, but we did some criminal defense work, and I would have to go handle the docket some days. And I just remember thinking, there are defendants who have something to lose, and there are defendants who have nothing to lose, and you could literally like peg it, watching the docket to like 100% accuracy, right? And I think the reason what you're saying is so important, and I think what so many of us that are in positions to influence policy or who do have perspective and have experienced things, we fundamentally fail to understand that there are like neighborhoods within a walk from where many of us live that have no idea the world is bigger and that there is something better out there. Is that why you think that's important, or is there more to it than that?
Absolutely. I think that what you just hit upon is that this myopic, like culturalism, right? Like that you're like, this is where I grew up and this is where I'm going to be. Like I grew up and I was homeless. Like I was like, my mom was on food stamps. I was in shelters. I was like bouncing off of couches. I shouldn't have left that world for all intents and purposes. But I knew, because I had a grandmother and I had a librarian and I had a teacher and I had these people. I didn't have the internet, but I had people that were like, hey, there are bigger things that you could do. And I just started doing them. I worked for hospice. I went and did family unity and worked with kids that were, I was 17 working for kids that had been taken by CPS. Like, I don't know what I was doing. I look back and I'm like, you're a kid. Like, I felt like I was 80. I'm just like, doing all of these things. But it was because I had stewardship. I found my people that would take me there. And what I think we can do with technology is that can come in and be a steward for good. We can use it for that. And we can take these kids out of these worlds where they're getting beaten down, or they see that they're not going to be able to outgrow, the trailer park or wherever they are. And they just like feel like they're going to fail down instead of like fail up. Run fast, break things. It's okay. But like figure it out so that you actually have that. And that's what I think technology can do. Sorry. It's a passion of mine because 2016, I was still elected and I was done. Like, I felt like it was this inflection point, and I don't want people to take this the wrong way or simplify it down to like a presidential election. Because like one of the challenges for me is like my philosophy and my theology are pretty public. Like I can't like take this public persona and be like, I'm neutral. I'm not neutral on philosophy and I'm not neutral on theology. But I would get really mad at some of my fellow self-proclaimed conservatives who would take this, they should just pull themselves up by the bootstraps mentality. Because like, I was born in what everything's relative. Like, I was born on what some people would call third base. I had a dad, you go back to like critical thinking. My dad, I always resented that he couldn't teach me how to hit a curveball or throw a fly rod and things that I really wanted as a kid. But I remember cell phones were just a thing, and I would be so excited my dad was coming home, or he would call the house and I'd pick up and I'd say, hey, where are you? And he'd say, in the car. And I was like, where's the car? He's like, on the road. What road? The one that has stoplights on it. And at like 5, he would make me like walk through what question I had to ask to get to the answer I want to. And I would get so annoyed, or my brother would cross-examine me at dinner for his Christmas present. And I think I was like 14 before I could finally give my brother a Christmas present because he knew how to cross-examine better than anybody in the world.
But now I realize, like, man, they were giving me the greatest gift. And so not everybody has that. Like, not everybody grew up with what I grew up with. And I don't feel like I was born on third base, but relative to somebody else. And like, there's this mentality of, well, they just pull them up by their bootstraps. And it just makes me, it like really pisses me off, because I don't think we take the extra step to go like, where are these people? Like, meet them where these people, whether we're talking about the criminal justice system or education, whatever group of people we're trying to talk about, like, let's step into their shoes for a second and understand, like, a lot of them have a desire to get out of that circumstance and they have no clue how. I think a lot of kids, getting back to your work, I think we're actually seeing kids like want to put the phone down. And I'll make it I am right now battling. There are times I'm working so hard. There are times that my phone is my break. I go sit in a barrel chair in the living room and I just start opening things, and I feel powerless some days to put it down, and I lose a collective 2-3 hours on a complete waste of time where I am in the moment going, this is stupid. And yet I feel like I can't stop.
That's the power.
And I don't think I'm
yeah.
dumb. I don't think I'm dumb. I don't think I'm, but like, if that's happening to me, who I think is pretty aware of these things, now take like a 10-year-old kid in school who comes from a broken household, who doesn't have parents investing in them, who doesn't have a Miss Allison, and like, what are we doing to support them? And I think that's why I'm in love so much with your work.
Well, to your point, like where you were in that litigation and the docket, you could see like they have nothing to lose. They have everything to lose. Kind of, you could just see the difference. I walk onto a school campus and I can immediately identify these kids have had social media for many years. These kids haven't. I can just see it. The hypersexualization, the blank stares, the lack of interest, the disrespect. Like, it is a fundamentally different child. And so I wish I could encapsulate that with like some sort of lens and like, put a documentary together, because you can see the influence that it creates in these kids and how it changes them and how it impacts them. But
so what are you doing?
Yeah.
What are you doing? Because I feel like I'm
Sure.
making this about me. I don't. What are
It's
you
a
doing
conversation.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
but, which I love, right? But I
Yeah.
want to make sure, because I think one of the important things we said, Lisa doesn't scale. You've got this experiential. I think the blessing and the curse of people like us that have very different experiences, applying them very different ways. The quick assessment, the ability to segment, and like almost the battlefield medic, right? Of like, this soldier's going to die no matter what happens. Give him a shot of morphine, put him in that corner. This soldier's going to live no matter what you do. Give him a shot of morphine, put him in that corner. Hyper focus on the ones that the decisions we make right now are going to make the difference between this soldier living and dying. So whether we're talking about it in the construct of a project for a state CIO or a governor, or we're putting it in the construct of a child and their trajectory with social media, very different applications. I think one of the blessings and the curse, like, you have this amazing talent and amazing experience that you're applying for so much good, but like, you can't go school by school by school and do that all day, every day, and then feel like knowing that it takes an investment, that it's not just give the answer. It's actually like train, equip, and teach.
Right.
So that can be a curse sometimes. I don't know if you feel this way, but like, there are times I walk out of settings where I'm like, man, I really wish I could invest in mentor there, but I just don't have bandwidth. Or, man, I really wish I could take that project on, but I just don't have bandwidth. I feel like you're saying the same thing. You walk into a school, you see the hypersexualization, you see I roll it all up into no identity, like a pursuit of identity. And then you see it. So what are you doing, and how are you working with school districts? Because maybe the other thing to set up your work, because I want you to actually like get into the platform here. The other thing I'd say that I think is real is that we have really great teachers. We have Miss Allisons all over. We have some great teachers. And I think they're experiencing the same frustration, but they don't know they didn't get training and education in this space. They got training and education in how to teach, hopefully. But they probably feel powerless, like, man, I've got these kids, I don't know how to. So how are you applying both the concept of scale and tactics and teaching and training both for the student, but also to support a district, an administrator, a principal, and a teacher in the classroom?
Yeah. Good question. So what we did was create it in like a tech platform. We had to. Eventually we had, in order to scale, to get it. But what I look at it as, it's got to be holistic. So we've got the K through 12 programming for the kids. We've got the professional development education piece for educators and administrators that really touch upon all of this content so that they actually know why is what's happening with kids and what to go into. And then we have the parent piece, and that tripod has to exist, because if we go in for the parents and the educators and we train the adults, then we're not empowering the kids. And my motto is, we educate first, we train them to be the trainers, right? We teach the kids how to be the leaders in the space, and then we actually empower them to go out and make effective change. Because to me, that's so important. So we have the K through 12 lessons that the kids go through that have a bunch of like ancillary stuff that is like essentially all online that teachers can use. They can send it home. They can have the families go through it. Then we have a peer-to-peer mentoring program, which I'm super stoked about, because that one is like, we're giving them actually rank, and we're giving them qualifications. And like, not only are they being mentored and getting points for that, they're mentoring others. So that train the trainer model I'm putting into the kids' hands. And it is amazing what happens, because, and I started that, I mean, Jamie, like, I've been in front of schools, and I will say, hand to God, I have asked every single group that I've been in front of, how many of you have younger siblings? They will all raise their hand. I will say, keep your hands up. How many of you that have your hands up want your younger sibling to be on social media? And hand to God, 100% of the time, those hands have gone down. So I was like, how do I capture that? How do I make them the leaders? How do I empower them to be the voice? Because I've basically come in, I was like, here's the rules. Here's what the tech industry is doing. You are not using their product. They've made you their product. And here's what you can do to have voice in the space. So that is really successful, that piece of it. And then I really, look at, how do I get parents involved, and how do I scale me? So creating this massive like language model that's closed model, does not go out to the whole internet. It is only the books that I've written, my TED Talks, all of the information that I have from my internet crimes unit detectives and teachers. And I've put together thousands of like Q&A questions for that to be an AI model, like an assistant to me, where if parents have a question or kids have a question, they can go in. And if they ask a question that's not in there, it basically says, that was a really thoughtful question. Thank you for giving it to us. We're going to get back to you on that, because it's important that you get an actual expert response. So I'm not just going to make it up and like have some sort of like computer create it for them. I want them to actually have access to it. And that to me is scalable. I'm excited about that.
You should be, and the world should be. I think, and this is where sometimes my theology, kind of foundation of everything, but like, I think social media is warfare, like in the sense of like, we battle it. And there are certain battles that I just don't think we can win until we recognize we're in a battle, and until we start to go like, wait a minute, I can't overcome what the tech industry has, like tech industry against me. And I think there's this, I wonder if you agree with this. I get very, when we talk about first order principles, second order, third order effects, I also think, I think that's one truth of like the inertia happening from first order principle down to the third and fourth order effects. Then I think there's also a truth of tensions. And it hit me as you were talking, where the same parent that by the time their kid is in middle school, now don't get me started on travel ball, that I could go off. Like, I love, not just because I grew up in the South, which means we are all Braves fans growing up at that age, but Chipper Jones has been very vocal. Jeff Francoeur, some of these guys have been very vocal. Like, my kids are going to play all the sports. We're not doing travel ball, 365. Like, we're going to have well-rounded kids. And I think it takes a Hall of Famer to go to all these dads that are trying to live vicariously through their kids, making them play travel ball year-round. The same dad, and I'll pick on dads here, the same dad that wants their kid, and maybe it's mom and cheer, and like there's parallels, but the same parent that by the time their kid's in like middle school is like, you're going to be the best kid on the team, you're going to have the best grades, you're going to go to the best college. Like, now all of a sudden they're invested in their kids' outcomes are maybe the same parent that was letting the child cry and not develop attunement or attachment or whatever the right word is the same parent that when mom and dad and the family went to dinner said, hey, quit asking us questions. Here's the iPad. Shut up and get lost in the screen. And there's this tension, right, between the kid who wants to have social media for themselves, experiences that warfare or that battle, and simultaneously is like, I don't want my younger sibling to go through this. And it feels like what you're circling around is several truths. Most people don't want the answer. They want to be trained. They want to be equipped. Like, they don't actually just want to be told by somebody older, don't make the mistake I made, or here's how to do it right. They actually want to be mentored, guided, empathized with. I'm gonna call him out again because I love him. But we're in a season with Grant. Like, he's getting ready to go to college, and he and I get to have some really special conversations. But he simultaneously wants to be very successful professionally, has all the talent to do it, and won't get off Snapchat because his argument is, well, that's just where I find out what everything's going on. Like, that's where, like, we have to have it to know, like, you know, where everybody's going and what's happening and all that. And there's this tension, right? Because if he really wants to excel professionally, he'll start taking the discipline and the habits now to go, like, this thing's killing me. And what we were actually talking about this last Sunday. I was like, man, as you go to college, like, if there's one thing that I could impart in you, because I battle this every day, is understand that, like, college is really the first time where you get to really, truly get left on an island to build the habits and discipline that will follow you for your career. So, like, schedule classes at 10 a.m., sleep till 9 a.m., that habit going to kick your butt. When you get into the real world, you can survive college that way. But it feels like you're circling around both those truths. There's always tension and stuff. And also, we really want to be trained and equipped. So I look forward to, like, I got a question for you. I'm going to put you on the spot. Yeah. Would you do like if we because the episode before you, and the episode before you is a guy named Rajiv Bajaj, and they do some awesome work in the K-12 space. That's the nonprofit stuff we've talked about, the AI convening that I think goes to whether you work. But, like, do you ever do webinars with interested folks in K-12 going, like, we've got this systemic problem in our district, in our school, in our classroom, and we don't even know where to begin? Because I feel like you have this tool, I'll call it a tool or set of tools, that, like, makes an impact now that like, the world just doesn't know exists.
Great question. I've done it over the years. I partnered with a company called Gaggle for a number of years. So I did, like, at least one a month, and that would go entirely to the K through 12 space. And now we're launching a webinar series, the Ask Lisa, like, webinar podcast, kind of, that we're going to take from these school districts and answer it. The superintendent meeting that I just came from, they're like, could you do 2 a month so that we can get more questions answered? So I'm kind of, like, looking in that space, but I'm building out, like, actually, like, a recording room so that I can just start doing them so that I can actually give them that answer. Because, to your point, it is like water through a fire hose right now with the AI space, and particularly Trump's mandate, the executive order that came out. And he's like, hey, in 90 days, I want every school and every child to have, like, AI training. And so I was like, like, thank God I had, like, looked in 2017 is when the CCP, or the Chinese Communist Party, had, like, actually said, we're going to have all of our kids trained by 2025. So I started back then, and I was like, all right, we need to have a curriculum. We need to have, like, professional development. And everybody was like, no, we're not going to do AI in school. Like, we're not going to let the kids use it. They're going to cheat. And I'm like, okay. So I'm silently over here creating my content because I'm like, you're not going to be able to do that for long. Like, that's not how the world's working. So,
well, so, all right. So let's segue to the AI. Yeah, I would love to segue to the AI, but I want to make sure we draw this connection.
Yeah.
If we kind of, if we thought about the first set of tool solutions you've built, it's, I don't want to overly simplify it, but to boil it down, it is the impact of social media and phone addiction in the educational environment. and the family? Like how would you, because I want to draw the dot in a second to AI. How would you distill down that first set of tools we talked about? Because you're like attacking so many things, but you're also doing it in a way that's like a system. What is that first thing you went after if you were to put that into a sentence?
Creating kind, empathetic digital citizens, right? Like I knew from the beginning, like kids, to your point, like you can do things behind a screen inside of a car. You can scream at someone or yell at them the same way these kids are using their devices, as if it's like an anonymous like post or things like that they can get away with. So I would say generally it is, how do we get kids to understand the power of their voice and how it's amplified through these devices? And how do we give them training on what bullying is, what harassment is, what inappropriate posting is, what sextortion is? Like, how do I communicate without terrifying them that there are over 200 million, I used to say there was like 1.8 million predators online every day. And David Erb, who's a whistleblower at Meta, basically said, Lisa, he's like, your numbers are off. He's like, you're talking about the convicted predators. He's like, there's 100 to 200 million every day that are on there looking at your kids and trying to get to them. And they know exactly where to go. And I was like, holy cow. Like, I didn't even know how many kids were being targeted at that point. And he was like, no, we have probably 100 to 200 million cases every day that come through. Which
represents, like, if we made it relative, you're talking 20 to 45% of the American population. And I know you're saying globally, we're not, but I'm saying globally. Like, to put that at scale, like 100 to 200 million people would make you like it's got to be like the 5th largest country in the world by population, probably. Like, like that is a massive number.
I mean, he essentially, particularly now with like the 764 microcells and the fact that you have like these like outsourced, it's so interesting. If you haven't seen Trafficked, which is like a series that's on, but I was looking at the one that, they basically, the UK and us went over and we like hired these like very poor countries to like go and be like our call centers. And they learned very quickly how to communicate with Americans specifically. And so it made them very good at how to create vulnerable populations in that. And I was like watching that system and I was like, so David said to me, he's like, there's 10 to 20 million online predators at a given time. And you have 100 to 200 million kids being impacted. And I thought, wow, like where are those numbers coming from? And then I watched the series on Trafficked and I was like, it would be really easy if you're actually training people on how to traffic.
Yep.
So, and that's what we're doing, so I don't try to terrify people with all of the details of like the bad and the evil out there, because I feel like that's the part that I need to protect them from. But what I want them to know is I want them to be thoughtful, critical thinkers when they're online, understanding reality. How do you discern something that's real and not real? How do you figure out whether or not somebody's lying or if it's a real person on the other end? Like, we've got to teach them. We can't just hand it to them, not train them.
And I think one of my favorite quotes is by a guy that's now passed away, Tim Keller, who was just a super gifted pastor. But truth without love is harsh, and love without truth is mere sentimentality. And I think, to your point, I think the least loving thing we can do is hide the truth. Mm-hmm. So, like, we have to be willing to give the truth. And I don't care what kind of context this is in, at like the global scale you're working, or just our individual relationships and our families and friends and work. Like, the lying is the most mean thing that exists. Mm-hmm. Now, that said, like, giving people the truth is also kind of harsh if we don't do it in love, or in I think the case you're going, like, where maybe we don't have a solution. Right? So I think it's cruelest to lie to families and kids that you're not in a battle, because we are. Like, yes. there are predators everywhere. They are using tools that could otherwise be used for good, and these people are seeking to harm you. You better understand you're on that battlefield not by your choice. Like, war is a one-party decision sometimes. Mm-hmm. Right? I get brought into a war because somebody declared war. And so I don't think there's anything to encourage you. I don't think there's anything, and I know you know this, but like, to hopefully just encourage you. Like, there's nothing negative about speaking the truth about what's out there. I think what I love so much about your work is that you're actually digging deep into the truth about what's out there, what's beneath it, and then here's how to solve it. So if we segment now to the AI piece, where I'm fascinated, and you just referenced the president's executive order on AI, I'm going to set this up this way. I would often talk in keynotes about the difference between capitalism and capitalism, like the A and the O, right? And this will go back to your legislative days. Capitalism is where people use government regulation to their advantage, their protection, to actually mitigate competition, right? They have the influence to be at the table, and they go, hey, there's an opportunity, let's seize it, or let's prevent somebody else from having the opportunity. Capitalism, that's become kind of divisive in some circles, is nothing more than free markets getting to work in a meritocracy. I think when we see executive orders like this, somebody says, oh, AI, executive order, opportunity to train, and they're not making the connection that you make, that AI is this extension or acceleration of your underlying work. Like, I think your work on AI is so powerful in general, but more so because it's built upon the foundational stuff that we've been talking about to date. So if you were to introduce your work in the AI front, and now understanding that there is a regulatory kind of demand for a solution, so many people, you said this so well, Lisa. When GPT started, academia, parents, students all looked at it as a shortcut for work, whether good or bad. The students said, hey, I can be way more efficient. The teacher said, hey, plagiarism's going to happen. But people were looking at it all wrong, in my opinion, and I think yours, as just like a productivity thing without understanding the psychological or sociological or contextual parts of it that are so much bigger than that. So how would you introduce, let's start without the executive order. And let's just say that if you were writing the prescription in this space and the work you're doing and what you were seeing coming, how would you introduce that?
Yeah, I think what I see and what is happening is that we aren't understanding that, I mean, AI has been around for over a decade. You know, we've been using it all along and people haven't known it. So anytime that you're basically going onto a website and like a little chat bot pops up and says, hey, can I help you with something in your cart or things like that? That's all AI. You know, so we've had it for a really long time. The part of that's changed is like putting it to the consumer and selling it that the way that they did, which is you can be more productive, as you said, or you can get these things done. And most people are using it still probably a little bit like Google, like they're not really sure of the power of what they can do with it. What I think that I see is if we continue to use it and we are outsourcing, for instance, like I've got a CEO and he's like, this is so great. Like I've got a bot that does my HR and I've got a bot that does this. And I've got that. He's like, I've let 3 people go. He's like, my company's more efficient. Like I'm going to sell and da da da. And so I look at it and I was like, all right, so you were like this family run business. You've let 3 of the people go that have been with you over a decade, building this company with you because you have this efficiency. And instead of like actually figuring out how do you get it further, how do you move that? Right now, you're at the space where you're actually like getting rid of people that are imperative to your company. And so that's like the psychological, that's the contextual, that's the part where it's like, all right, so this tool can kind of cut corners for you, but what is that company going to come in and buy from you now? They can't buy your chatbot, right? They can't buy like the value of what that team was there did. So I think that we're jumping a little bit too quickly ahead of things. And the same thing with kids. If kids are in school and they're starting to use AI without understanding what the prompt is giving them, without being able to discern and fact check and be able to understand from their own critical thinking of what they want to say, and they're just like cutting and pasting and moving, they're not going to be able to, in the end, graduate and be able to go into the workforce and be productive citizens.
I think I'm gonna make a bold claim here. I think you and I, with our respective backgrounds, could out-prompt most people at big tech. And the reason I say it is what made prompting very natural for me, like the connection, was I always tell people that getting a law degree is actually an engineering degree. It's just an engineering degree in the English language. And what made prompting very natural for me was like to me, the GPT was a witness on the stand that I was either trying to elicit a story from or interrogate for the right answers. But it requires a heavy degree of critical thinking, which I think goes full circle back. What I just heard you saying, and before I sound arrogant, I don't mean that to say we're great prompters, we're awesome. I mean to say it like, if you don't have the critical thinking piece, like I love where you went with that at the top, because I think like civilization demands critical thinking to survive. I would actually argue that if we played the Vogue game of Why the Roman Empire Fell, or any other great civilization, it is true to say that the state got so big, the person got so small, but like that's really just rooted in critical thinking. Like it was really just a stack of bad decisions that didn't say, what does history tell us about this decision in front of us, because it's going to repeat, or if we do this, then what happens, or where's the tension? And I think what you're doing is helping educate people on the difference between using AI as a shortcut to the answer. Because if that's the case, then sure, I can downsize my organization. I can leverage tools like Zapier or Make and automate all sorts of different things. And yes, we can get more efficient. And so now my choice is, well, if I replaced the function, I think, you know what? I think that CEO you're describing, not to, like, let's just say he's hypothetical. I think that example of a CEO is the other side of the coin, where some employees think that AI is coming for their job. That is not true. AI is coming for their job description, but it is not coming for their job. A CEO who thinks that AI is a way to displace people fundamentally misses that AI is not a replacement for the job. It is a way to augment the job description and to scale the benefit to more customers.
Correct. Well said.
Okay.
And that's the part that I think that we're missing. And I'll just an anecdotal story. I worked with a CMO that had left the medical field, and he's like, I'm going to go into insurance. I'm going to take this big job, and I'm going to like really clean it up. Like it's a mess over there. And he really, I think idealistically, 10 years ago, thought that he could go and do that. And I went on his podcast and I had this conversation with him, and it was a frustration of a medical thing that I had gone through. And I was like, listen, and I'm a fighter, so I didn't take the insurance denied claims well. And I like threw them in front of like CNN and Fox News. I was like, hey, this is what they're doing to people, and so I got his attention. We had this great conversation, and I thought it was amazing to have the conversation. Not everybody would be that lucky or that have that opportunity to do that. And what he told me was, he's like, once I got there and I realized that if I really did create the efficiencies that I could, and remind you, this is like 10 years ago when he went over there, when it wasn't about AI, but he said, there's a lot of people that lose their jobs, and that impacts society. And if society doesn't have jobs, then it hits onto like the numbers that we look at on, political parties. And, and I just thought, just stop. Like, where does it end? Like, how far upstream do we have to go to be like, hey, you've got bloat in your organization, and you have 20-year-olds denying claims for people who have cancer and things like that. Like, you have to change that. He's like, well, they need some sort of jobs, and I just, it was disheartening. And that's where I see some of the AI decision-making and leadership, where they're like, it's just like a quick grab to like go out there, and they're not thinking through in the opposite way. Like this guy was like, we're going to keep everybody because like societally, we can't like handle losing hundreds of thousands of jobs in this organization. But that's what he just said to me when he said it. We had hundreds of thousands of jobs that he could have eliminated that weren't needed.
So what's funny is I like on our episodes to kind of throw a statement out and get an agree or disagree. Nobody makes me more nervous to do it than you.
Oh gosh.
Because I'm like so far out of my league here. When you were just talking about that, Lisa, something hit me that I'd love your take on. I think who really should be scared of AI. And I think, let me say this first. I think that your work on the digital citizen and on the AI front is, and I honestly, like, this is not hyperbole, and I do get fairly accused of being hyperbolic from time to time, and sometimes I'm intentionally hyperbolic. This I mean with like the most stone cold seriousness. I think the work you're doing is fundamentally critical for the Republic's survival. Because I think we're at this inflection point where there is a force or forces or powers that are so powerful that if the individual citizen, individual family unit doesn't understand what's happening, we have no hope. Like, it will be this tidal wave that'll take us over. Now, assuming we can amplify your work and we can help you scale and we can help you do the work you're doing inside that community. I know you're very gracious to say, hey, I'm not the only one, but like, this is the way I'm doing it. But like, if we can help amplify the good work and the healthy work that you're equipping, then I think who should be fundamentally terrified of AI is the grifters and kind of the oligarchy. Because never before has the individual citizen had more access and speed to keep up with what used to take a ton of money and access. Like, what AI, I think, empowers in the good way is people who know the right questions to pursue truth, to create transparency that finally starts to chip away at a lot of the plague of kind of this corporate oligarchical mentality that's like, we can't do that, we have too many people, and then we can't sponsor this golf tournament, and then we can't go on this president's club trip, and then we can't do all this, none of which actually benefits the patient, the student, the consumer. So that's another rant. You just get my brain going, and sorry. Do you agree?
I do agree.
I could honestly talk 100%. To you for days. Do you agree that like that's the tension of like, if we don't get this foundational work done, like if we don't do this foundational equipping of the family unit and the citizen, the student, the child, the parent, that like America is screwed because we cannot possibly overcome this. But if we do get it right, we can make more progress than maybe we've made in the history of this country.
I agree. And I think that the curve and where I see AI is that the understanding of how it works, right? And if you understand that if you ask even a critically thought out prompt, it's going out and taking context out of the entirety of the internet. And so in that world of what it's scraping that data from has people that have evil intent. There are people that are anti-Semitic. There are people out there that have websites on eating disorders and drug dealers and traffickers and all of that stuff. So you have to keep in mind, and this is why for my AI model, it's like it will be a closed model. It will not go out to the world. It will only be contextual educational information in there that I like approve, because I want it to be authentically empathic, authentic, and have an expertise that people can trust. And
can I ask you a follow-up real quick before?
Sure.
Because I want you to get to the because. When you use the term close model there, I want to make sure I'm tracking the difference between open and closed, because I think there's two meanings this could take. One is open as far as what it ingests, right? Like correct. Open model is like people can add to my model. The other is closed as in accessing your model.
When I'm using it, and it's probably not the right terminology.
You're fine. I just want to make sure I'm tracking to.
Yeah. So the hardest part of having a company that's a tech-based company that's educating people on technology is not understanding the technology yourself as a CEO. So what I mean by that is, and I think that they call it a RAG model, but that the repository of information, assuming that's it closed. Is my house, that is closed.
Yep.
I will not be going outside of that. And that I will basically become a curator of all things that I find is important. And let me give you the example. I can go on to like we had LexisNexis in law school that has all the access to all of the books that we needed when we were in law school. There's repositories for journals and all of the things. Well, we have now in a society people publishing things in journals, whether it's through LexisNexis or a lot of people use Google Scholar. If you're in a university, you can access like real journals that are actually being published. But I had a conversation on a podcast with someone who runs a journal, and she said the content that's coming in isn't actually written by a human. Like we're having submissions on like we did this experiment and here's our results, and it's 80% AI. And she said to me, she said, it has become my quest now for her to go out and look. So I, as a scientist at heart, I look at the numbers. So I can have, I mean, I had a 30-year-old in here the other day, and he's like, I don't know what you're going to say about this, but here's a study on why weed is healthy. And I don't know why like you think it's like causing brain issues in kids. I was like, well, let me see your study. It was sponsored by the weed industry. It had an a number of people in the study of 18. And I was like, there's no power behind your study. Let me explain to you what research methods is. And let me just give you, a reality check on this, right? And again, like it's not my platform against, but like 99% THC without CBD when our body has cannabinoid receptors, like it doesn't work. Like kids are getting like schizophrenia and like all of these things. And anyway, so it's just like a side platform for me. But that's my point of like having a RAG model, I think is what they call it, where the repository is closed and curated by an expert. Yep. Is we're not going to put data in there that's getting fed out to the people that are using it that is not an expert quality and
which I think
basically
is
vetted.
Which I just wanted to make the distinction because so you're then opening the model both in the platforms you're doing, and I don't want to speak for you. At some point, you could open that RAG model where other models have the ability to query it, but not to contribute to that underlying foundation, right?
Yep.
Okay, so let's wrap here before we get into what we call the roundup, where people get to really get a little insight to Lisa the person. Tell me about the executive order, the need to act on this stuff, because you referenced it, but I want to make sure we leave the audience with kind of tactical ways to consume if they're in a space that now they find this regulation. What is the regulation requiring, and what are you doing to help people comply with, and more importantly, not just comply with, change lives, build outcomes?
So what the executive order, I'm just going to like high level it, is we want every student and in the society to have training in AI starting fall of 2025. So literally this month, next month, when schools are going back into session, they are to be trained in that. When I look at that, it also wants the workforce to be trained. So there's also kind of corporate and governmental roles and all of that. So what I did and what I had already built was a training module. So like I have a professional development for either government or education. Like here's what AI is. Here's the upper levels of it. This is how it works. This is what you should know about it. This is what you should appreciate. This is what you should fear. This is what, understanding that there's a continuum of AI. And I think most people are fearful of the end of it, where it becomes autonomous and it's making decisions without us. Like we should all be terrified of that. But AI generally is not autonomous. It is generally what we're feeding to it. So it's just teaching people about what AI is, and like also how do we now use it appropriately and how do we train it appropriately. And then the K through 12 AI modules that we've created is basically taking kids in a scaffold approach, just like all education does, and we build upon it. So when they're little, it's very simplistic, but again, giving them the understanding and the healthy respect of what it can do and what it is and what it isn't. Because I think that, to your point, and when you encouraged me earlier to be honest, the part that I worry about is I don't want to overwhelm people with like, here's how it can be really super dangerous. I want to really give that picture of like, tech as a tool is awesome. Tech as a toy, not so much. So let's kind of look at what the good and the bad of it is. So that's what we're doing with AI is we built it into the DCA program. And then we've just created trainings so that everybody can be compliant within the first semester, and jump on webinars and do the trainings and do all of the things. That's what we're doing.
So I want to make sure we want to make sure we do it right, but we'll put in the show notes where people can find you and that to make sure that if they're trying to get there. I think if I were to sum up so much of your work, I forget where I heard this, but nothing is good or bad until it's made relative or until we understand like how it's being used, right? And it's really easy for us to look at a drug, a gun, like go down a hammer, like all of these tools. Some people describe them as a weapon, and maybe they're applied as a weapon, but like all of these tools have power for good or bad. This is not a new. I think what if I were to sum up the conversation with you that I feel like sums up all of our conversations is that like you're getting really deep on what is this thing, where's the psychology behind it, where's the history behind it, because AI really isn't anything new. It's just a new application of timeless sociological and psychological and experiential principles that have existed with different applications. Now we just have this like super powerful application, and it would be really easy to get lost in the sex appeal of that powerful application and not just kind of strip it down to the fundamentals and kind of ask the why and what's behind that, and how do we make sure that in every situation possible it's applied for good of the family, good of the individual, good of the republic. So I love the work you're doing.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I think that you well said. And one of the things you said, like as a tool, and for me, like I used to talk about this years ago, but I would say like if I walked into a house as a parent and there was unfettered internet access on one table and then there was a gun on a second table, I would say I would be more terrified of my child having access to the unfettered internet than I would the gun. Like, children naturally understand that is something to be cautious about, or they understand that it's a one and done. It might have 6 chambers or whatever it has, but it's not something that will curate and explore their life and shift who they are as a human the way an unfettered access to internet is. And so that's what drove me into this.
I think that's awesome. I think there's so many things we could pull off of that. Like even when used for bad, the harm of the gun is so much smaller, right? Like it doesn't provide global scale at once. It doesn't have anonymous impact. It doesn't have, and there is some recognition of like, okay, that's powerful. So even if we have somebody that picks it up and uses it for bad, it's starting with the construct of I can do harm with this. And I think, gosh, I love that take so much, Lisa, because I do think we have so many people that don't understand the harm of, that they don't understand the power and the harm that can be done with something that seems innocent, innocuous, or just a dopamine hit. Yep. All right, so we're gonna make sure we get you out of here on time because you have way more important things than talking to this bozo.
Love talking to you.
We love doing this thing. We call it the Roundup, kind of a unscripted, a lot of them kind of the same questions, but just a chance for people to get to know you and also maybe to get some stuff outside your work. So if you had one piece of advice that shaped your career, and I think this might be hard for you because you've had so many, but if you had one piece of advice, one thing that you feel like is a truth that has really shaped your career, what is it, and who or what do you give the credit to?
I would say what I start every day with and end every day with, I call it my end points, beginning and end points of my day, is did you leave the world a little better than you found it this morning? So every morning I kind of do this little meditation and I think through kind of my intentions without my phone, just kind of sit through, think through the people in my life. And at the end of the day, my question is always, did you leave the world a little better today? And it could be like yesterday, there's a woman having trouble like pumping her gas, and I went up and I was like, it seems like you're having trouble, and it's like an 80-year-old woman like cursing at the station, and she's like, anyway, like, so yesterday was really easy for me. I was like, I did, like I made her day way better by like just helping her with at the pump. But I think that, and I would say that was my grandmother. My grandmother taught me the golden rule, and my grandmother was the person who on very difficult days, and I could give you 1,000 stories that I can bring up with her. But that was the one piece of advice. And I tell people, I was like, if you just look at your life and you know that you have to be accountable at the end of the day to something like that, then it just drives you during your waking hours.
Love it. This next one I sometimes pull, but there's no chance I'm pulling it with you. Because you already gave me one. So the grayscale is not allowed, but I do want you to touch on it. You got to give me another one. What is your secret weapon for productivity? Like for yourself or for somebody else? If you said like, hey, I need to give somebody a practice that really helps them lock in, I am a living testament and a complete hypocrite that I cannot obey your advice enough on this. But like my life is so much better when my phone is grayscaled. It is infinitely less interesting at grayscale. And we may even in the show notes link to how folks, the one thing I did do, by the way, there's a shortcut because I noticed, here's where I got in trouble. I noticed that there were certain things I needed color for. If I was doing some design work or I was editing a picture, whatever it was, it's like that I can't do in grayscale. And now I have to like, the shortcut is both good for productivity, but then it's really easy for me to toggle back and forth between grayscale and color. But what's another productivity hack for yourself or that you give to patients or friends that you would say, here's a way to help you lock in?
I'll give you two because I think they're both equally important. One is disconnect your computer device from from mirroring your phone. So the fact that if you're on your computer and messages are coming through and you're seeing all of the things that your phone has on it, you 100% are not going to be locked into whatever you're doing on that computer. So that to me, particularly with younger kids, like they think it's like, oh, I can go to school and I can pretend to be on my computer and I'm like messaging my friends. So disconnect that, like make sure that those aren't connected. That's like really from a productivity standpoint, I think it's really, really important. And then for me, like I actually, ironically, don't use my phone unless I have to for patient. I don't use it at like it's this $1,000 unit that I carry around that I use to like schedule patients. But when I have it, I give myself a timer. So I think it's really important. And I don't participate in social media because I like just know like the bad of it. I know I do have social media platforms, but I don't go in personally and use it. I use it for business. But I actually, for me, I think like putting those timers on, I tell everybody that. And my daughter who played soccer, I had like all the soccer moms and the dads are like, oh my God, you gave me my wife back. Because like you put timers on it and it actually brings you back to your real life more often than not. So you can do that however old you are. And I think it's important to do.
For follow-up later, because I did that. And it doesn't work for me. And I want to know why. I think I'm in a worse, like I get the notification, like you've hit your time limit for the day. And then I'm just like, ignore for today. The one that I've loved, by the way, the one that has been great is the brick device. I think we talked about that.
Oh, yeah.
Before. I love the brick. Huge ambassador of the brick. Have one at home. My challenge on days that I work from the house, I keep it on the fridge, which makes me have to go walk and tap my phone. And sometimes I'm such a degenerate that I'm like, I'll go tap my phone. But at least that walk like is a check. I'm not doing a good enough job. I bought one for the road. I've actually started thinking I got to get it right. I've run into some problems where like on road trips, I've bricked on the way out. And then there's something that I needed that I didn't have whitelisted for like real work and got in trouble. But I love the brick device. That has actually worked for me. I'm not saying the timers don't work. That's why I think it's like, if I were to describe you and your work in one word, it's intentional. Like there is an intentionality behind everything you do. And I think that's one of the things I appreciate about you most. Now, to segue from intentionality, what do you do to unplug? Because I'm a big fan of Sabbath and sabbatical and like rest and like we all need it. And you are highly functioning. You are really highly functioning, super hardworking. What is it that you do to just like unplug an activity, a thing? And meditation doesn't count for this because I think that's like what is the enjoyment, the rest, okay, this is where my brain just shuts off if Lisa's going to do that.
Me, like music and hiking or walking My daughter just asked me to start running with her again, and I was like, I think my body's a little too old for running after a couple of times. But I love getting out on the trail, honestly, by myself with like really good music. And just I've got like a ton of different playlists, so it just depends. But like no conversation, like, and just really letting myself center. And then my other like thing is like I love to go and sit in a hot shower because for me, like that's where all of my intuitive moments come in. And like I don't talk about it a ton of times, but like when I don't have, like I'm stripped of everything and I'm just like in there, like that's when I'm flooded with like all of the like probably the creatives and the ideas and like, I feel like I feel my grandmother come through sometimes and like, just so I think that that unplug is like truly for me is like on the hike out in nature, really feeling grounded and in the shower.
I'm going to ask a question. Give me 1 second because I got to make sure I get this. Do you think there is a quiet, complete vulnerability to that setting? Like, there's no clothes to cover. There's no noise that's is that what you're getting at when you say like?
Yeah, 100%. I think that it really, and you can
there's
look
no
at
makeup, there's no clothes,
there's
no noise, it is like literally just, and I mean this like in the most respectful way possible. It is just like us naked, like
to the world,
completely
to our
vulnerable.
thoughts.
Yes.
Yep. And it's interesting, like a lot of people don't talk about that, but like when I start sharing this and like in these groups and, obviously now publicly, but it's like, I think people need to like understand that a bit more of like those moments are really, really important to listen in on, lean into what's coming through.
I love that. So you talked about the trail run.
Yeah.
And you talked about music.
Yeah.
And you're a psychologist with a JD and a PhD and all these things. You got, give me one book and one band that you're convinced the world should know about that isn't well known enough.
The one book, which is probably recency effect for me, is What Happened to You. And if you haven't read that book or listened to it on audio, they did a really good job. It's Oprah Winfrey, but with like the neuropsychologist that I actually met through the bureau, who came through and like they really give and personalize trauma and how it erodes into your later life. And I think that I'll leave it at that, but that like What Happened to You is an amazing book. And then song, gosh, I have so many that I love, and I don't
song or
like,
band. This is a band because I'm
band.
say that, like just a band that you think doesn't get enough appreciation or that more of the world should know about.
I would say the band that I probably go to most is Imagine Dragons.
Okay.
But I love Adele. Like, so I just, I've got it all. I'm all over there.
Yeah.
So yeah, but Imagine Dragons is probably,
too.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm
Coldplay, I was too soon. I don't know.
You said earlier that like when the HR bot happens, and I couldn't help but think like at least the HR bot couldn't go to the concert with the CEO until robots show up. But I feel like those jokes are overplayed at this point.
I
know. But there is such an interesting psychology. Like I think like beneath the surface of what became all the memes, there's like the office team, but like there had to be so much that went into that moment. Like the fact that they were in a suite, the fact that coworkers were there, the fact that it was so brazen. Like there are so many fascinating elements to me of what is clearly a tragedy.
And all I could think of was his kids and his family.
The kids on both sides. Like it just,
yeah,
like that. It's interesting because those kids may not like they're son and daughters of a CEO of a billion-dollar tech company. They probably have access to all the things they want. People look at it and go, "Your life is easy." That's like trauma that will follow. Mm-hmm. Like that's real trauma that will follow, and I think that's something I didn't understand. All right, because I'm looking at the clock and I know we have a hard stop. 2 final questions. What's your hottest take that you don't think should be controversial? I actually think you gave it with the gun in social media.
Yeah. I was just going to say, I've had death threats given to me over saying, I'm happy to talk about a school shooting if we're going to talk about mental illness and not the Second Amendment. Because I think that, to me, that shouldn't be controversial.
Yeah.
These kids Yeah, I mean, these kids have issues, and we're not treating it. We're not seeing it. We're not going upstream early enough. So
It's fascinating to me that that's the only tragedy in society that we talk about the tool more than the user or the victim of the tool.
right.
And
Right.
I love where you're going. All right. You get a walk-up song when you walk into the office every day. If your team or you picked your walk-up song as you walk to the office, what would it be?
It would probably be Pharrell Williams "Happy." Is that the right? Is that the right side? Actually, and I say that because I just did a keynote, and the lady who's like managing it, she's like, "Here's the itinerary." Blah blah blah. She's like, "What's your walk-up song?" And I was like, "Oh gosh, I don't know." And so I'm like talking to the tech guys because I'm the nerd that like actually makes friends with the AV guys.
Yep.
And the guy's like, "You're just like so like bubbly and happy." He's like, "How about this?" And he put it on, and I like danced my way up to the stage. So I don't know.
I think it's impossible to listen to that song and not dance. Like it is,
Right?
It is really hard. All right, here's kind of our signature that we have the most fun with. You get to leave a question for the next guest.
Oh, that's a
But
good
before
one.
that, you get to answer the question that Rajiv left you.
Ooh, okay.
Rajiv left you the question, how do you think about leading in this moment? Which I think is like the most perfect question for you. How do you think about leading in 2025 with all of these things going on? Like, how would you sum up leadership, and what does leading look like?
That's a great question. See, I'm simultaneous with my ADD brain thinking about my next question.
I try and like, I always wonder if I'm like hurting you by letting you know what's
Right.
coming or if I'm helping.
Right. Okay. So what in this moment, what leading for me,
What leading
is
looks like right now.
authenticity, integrity, and honesty in the path forward. That not all the answers are there, but we will get there together. I think that you have to have a humble nature about you to lead in this space, and you have to be willing to be authentic about yourself and where you come from. And for me, I don't meet a person that I don't feel their story. I don't know if that means it. So for me, leading is feeling and encompassing like the emotions and the person and the people that I come in touch with.
I'd argue that's why I think your background's really special, to be clear. I think there are other people with similar backgrounds. I think what makes you so exceptional is that you focus on the questions, not the I have all the answers. I
Yeah.
love that, right? Like it would be easy for somebody or lazy for somebody with all your experience and knowledge and just intellect to go, oh, I know the answer to that. What I love in talking with you is that you have the questions. Okay, so you get to leave a question for the next guest. And you don't know who the next guest is because, quite frankly, we have not finalized the next guest. But you get to leave whatever you want for the next guest the way Rajiv left that one for you. What do you want to leave him?
I would say, what is the most humbling experience that you've had, and what did you learn from it in your space?
You're so good. You're so
Is that a
good
good
at
one?
this. It is so good because like the thing that I think is cool about this is like it does create some like when we knew that you were following Rajiv, we were like, oh my gosh, this is perfect. They're doing like he does exclusive K-12 work and higher ed, not exclusive, but like overwhelming education space. You two will be such good friends when we get together. But it was like Paige and I were both like, man, Lisa is the perfect person to like follow Rajiv and kind of this education sequence. But also like the questions should be agnostic of that kind of thing. And so
Right.
I think your question applies to anyone. I didn't ask you the one actually.
Okay.
I could go back real quick. This one always gets dinner table conversation going. You stay at a friend's house. You don't have access the morning when you go to leave to ask them the question of, do I strip the sheets or make the bed? What is the appropriate thing to do when you leave a guest house and stay in the room? Do you strip the sheets or do you make the bed?
So I always strip the sheets, make the bed, and put them in the laundry room every time.
Love it. Love it. Love it. Lisa, I know we ran over by a few minutes.
That's okay.
I cannot thank you enough. I love selfishly, I love talking to you, but I also feel like people who listen to this, there's some stuff they're going to get better. We will make sure we collaborate with you on the show notes because I want to make
Awesome.
sure that we get your work exposed everywhere because I really do believe it's that important, and we just want to be a cheerleader. So thank you for doing this.
Thanks for having me. Like, this is amazing, and I probably could talk to you all day. So
I was about to say,
so
like,
exciting.
I would love to do more of these.
Yeah.
So subject to your calendar, we'll do this as often as you want, on or off camera, because you just make me better.
Oh, that's nice. Thank you. I appreciate you.
All right. Thanks, Lisa. We'll get you out of here.
All right.
Take
thanks.
care. Bye.
Bye.